All right, so welcome to this session on Take Your Collaboration to the Next Level with Microsoft Teams. My name is Alex, and with me here I got Olav and Emil. Why don't you start presenting yourself? Go ahead, Emil.
Okay, hi, my name is Emil Cabot. I'm an MVP in Cloud and Data Center Management based out of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And I am here as a relatively new Teams user. I've been starting to use Teams as a third-party consultant. So I'm coming in today to join you, Alex, because I want to be the devil's advocate, and I want to see how everything that you're going to show me today is going to actually work in my world as a third-party consultant, or if I really need to go become a full-time employee again to maximize my use of Teams.
Well, I hope to meet your expectations a little bit at least. So, Olav, tell me about yourself.
Yeah, I'm also a cloud and data center MVP, but I'm working much in the environment of OneDrive, SharePoint, Office, EMS. So my level on this is more the security part than the actual usage part. So I'm here to bust you about security.
Oh, exciting. And my name is Alex. I'm a Windows and Devices for IT MVP, and my main focus is end user experience. And hopefully you're going to get some tips and tricks on Microsoft Teams in this session. And what I'm really going to start about is the communication part of Teams. So throughout many of the sessions and events that you go to, you hear about the modern area, the modern solution and the modern laptop. No one talks about the information era, but that's pretty much what we do, right? We moved from shipping devices and shipping stuff to moving information. So what do you think about that, Emil?
It's, you know, it's inclusive is the way that I'm looking at it. The modern desktop is really about information. And the big thing is that, it's a separation, and I think that's exactly what I look at as the modern desktop. It's the separation from what you're doing to what you're doing it on. From an enterprise perspective, and as an engineer and an architect, my job is to make sure an organization's data is protected. At the end of the day, if you want to run on an unpatched workstation, go for it. I want to make sure that my data is protected. So utilizing the new solutions, especially that come with the Office 365 suite, that allows me to protect the data using things like SharePoint, like OneDrive for Business, like conditional access, to ensure that when an end user accesses my corporate data, that data will remain protected.
Well, that's a nice take on it. What do you say, Olav? I think you have a session on pretty much that topic later on this week.
Yeah, I will be talking about how you can secure your data in a OneDrive environment. That be SharePoint sites or OneDrive home areas. And the main thing is actually that we have to see that we are not related to the device anymore. It's just information. And if we can get the information to protect itself, it will be much more secure.
Yes, pretty much like the analogy. You don't want to drive the car. You want to be somewhere. You don't want to use the device. You have to you want access to the information inside. And like, what kind of communication forms do you use on a daily basis, Emil?
I'd say 95% of my communication is done through Skype for Business. Typically when I come into an organization, I'm a third-party consultant. More often than not, I begin and end an engagement with a client without ever getting credentials in their environment. So I never have an Active Directory account on their side. Organizations will federate their Skype for Business with my tenant, and then I'm able to communicate with them as if I was a part of the internal company. I've noticed that over the last, especially the last 6 months, companies are moving to Teams internally. And so I've started to drink the Kool-Aid. I've started to play around with it myself. It's a really, really cool tool. And I'm interested to see where it's going. And I guess to kind of segue this conversation a little bit, because we are here at Microsoft Ignite, there's been some huge announcements this week about Teams, and there's a big drive into getting Teams into the enterprise. And I'm honestly really excited to see how Teams will enable me to take my documentation and collaboration to that next level with third-party companies and not just my internal group.
Cool. there's a lot of companies asking why should we adopt a team? We got Skype for Business, we got email, we got all of these things. So hopefully, are there any return on investments that's kind of a quick win for the companies, Olav?
The best thing is that you actually are already paying for it. Most likely you're using Office in an online world, and then you have the license to start using Teams. But I also see one of the big challenges is that you actually need to you ask just what kind of communication are you using, and we are using Teams a lot. We are almost never ever using Skype anymore, but there are still need for email for certain types of communications. So we need to make sure that we will create the rule sets to make sure that the right information are spread on the right channels.
Yeah.
You cannot use Teams for everything. You have to know what it's supposed to be used for.
Yeah, important routines might actually be more convenient sent on an email instead of having in a Teams group. Like,
Yeah.
so yeah. We want to talk about structure. Have you ever ended up at a company as a consultant and tried to navigate throughout their nest of documents and files and try to figure out where they put things and they make no sense?
No. I tried once many years ago. I failed miserably, and now I request it. I don't look. Generally, something like that falls into, the situation where somebody wins $10 million and walks out the door. Somebody has to come in to pick up that slack. Traditionally, internal IT have been very seclusive of their individual intellectual property. So what I've learned about the company, I wouldn't think, not me as a person, but that, that end user, that admin, wouldn't think to document that because they've already know where it is and they're not going to forget. So that continuity outside of person, but that continuity of role just hasn't existed. And no, there's not a way without using these new modern technologies. You can't realistically go through file servers and shares and doc repositories and OneDrives and wikis and SharePoints to find architectural documents, especially coming in as I do as a consultant, because it's all billable hours, right? And I can't justify that time.
Yeah. So structuring and like make it searchable and structured to find your data and collaborations is super important and one of the big benefits about Microsoft Teams. And
you can actually get your data in the same channel as the discussions
yeah.
you have with your team's mate, so it's actually easy to find the files related to the group you are in and discussing with.
And
so
even
it's easier to find it.
Multiple types of data as well.
Yeah.
Like if you have a poll, if you have a wiki, if you have a SharePoint site, you can find everything inside of one team channel.
OneNote.
OneNote, that's one big take of it. Yeah, that's true. And of course, there's one final thing. And my take to Microsoft Teams is that companies fail on onboarding. They seem to think that IT is special, and they start creating a structure and then try to replicate that out into the rest of the organization without actually taking the user's need in consideration in mind. So onboarding is really important and get the user voice from the company. Have you ever seen anything like that in either of your projects?
Absolutely, and specifically, mostly back in the day when organizations were doing that initial move from file share to SharePoint, right? I mean, traditionally you'd have a folder per department, and then everything underneath that folder would be organized based upon whoever the admin for that department was. There was no cross siloing, so if I ended up moving departments, it was a whole new process to learn just to find documentation. This isn't a product rollout. This is a culture shift, right? We need to almost take more effort and more time to educate our end users and train our end users how to use this new platform than actually putting it in.
You mentioned culture shift. You want to elaborate that?
Well, it's a culture shift, right? Like, I mean, for years, and not just the last few years, but 25 years, right? Network drives has been the thing. There's been a network drive for HR. There's been a network drive for whatever. And traditionally, it's always been save your files on the network, share them, copy them down. As soon as somebody copies a file down to their local machine because they want to work at it offline, we run into one big problem. right? Version conflicts. We have version issues where, oh, no, I don't have that in my copy. Oh, well, you didn't get the one that we sent out last week? Well, no, it wasn't put in the network drive, right? These little things, this is all the cultural issues around document management and collaboration that Teams is starting to address.
I really, really like the way you're thinking because culture, organizational culture, and how to kind of store data and information is one of the big issues. You think like it's still 1998, but it's really something that's changed. What about you, Olav? Do you see these cultural changes?
Yeah, you can see that the users are old-fashioned. They like to do everything they have done all the time the same way and never change anything, no matter how hard it is. But if you manage to actually explain why, so the user respects your decision to go over to Teams or whatever platform, you actually need respect amongst the users, so they actually will be motivated to do the translation.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah.
So, moving on, I did an interview of Jeffrey Snover. For those of you who don't know Jeffrey Snover, that's the guy who invented PowerShell. And there's some super neat keys to that interview. And one of the things he said about working with the PowerShell deployment was that there was a culture conflict. And we're not talking about old versus new tech. We're talking human culture. And this is one of the things that I hope and I partly see in Microsoft Teams. If you create a sales channels, sales personnel tend to behave and use their language in a different way than HR. And HR use their language and like sort things out differently than IT. And knowing that they're not being rude or being unthoughtful, it's just the way they are within their culture. Have you ever seen and experienced some of those sorts, Emil?
Well, I mean, it's going around the world, different strokes for different folks, right? I mean, taking global culture out of it and just looking at a single business and looking at different departments, right? Inside of IT, when we file a document, we think about where it sits inside of our infrastructure, right? We're going to start at a high level. And we're going to say servers and workstations, right? We're going to say third-party applications. We're going to say homegrown applications, and we're going to start to develop that folder structure, that hierarchy based upon how we do our day-to-day, right? HR will be the same thing, you know, hiring, terminations, yada yada yada. There is no cross collaboration between different groups inside of an organization outside of email, right? It's internally, you will create a document, and before that document moves to another silo in the organization, it's extracted out of whatever document collaboration system you're doing, it's attached into an email, and it's forwarded over to the other group. Why? I don't know, but that's the way people do it.
So silo with bridging with email is pretty much
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Siloed teams with an email bridge. Yeah.
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 So have you ever seen those email VPNs before, Olav?
Sorry, email.
VPN, moving from one silo to another
yeah.
silo.
Yeah, that's the basic communication amongst most users in most company, and also between companies. For we also have to address that aspect of it. How should you communicate between company that you are working on just as internal resources?
That is true, and taking that, having a rogue email sent from your department and your silo to what you thought was your corporate different silo, but ended up in a different company. Doing the modern way of communication, like in Microsoft Teams, you might actually have some more control on it, right?
Yeah, yeah. And if you implement Azure Information Protection on top of this and make sure all your files are secured if they should be secured. So if you are unlucky and do a mail forwarding to somebody that shouldn't had it, you can make sure that he will not be able to open it, or you can recall the information.
That's true. And also, I had a second interview, like preventing a mess. I had an interview with Ben Armstrong. And for those of you who don't know Ben Armstrong, he is the Hyper-V guy. You probably know him even better than I do, Emil.
Yeah, Ben Armstrong is Twitter handle @VirtualPCGuy, right? Virtual PC. Can you guys remember that?
Oh, that's...
Right. That's how long Ben has been working with virtualization platforms. So yeah, he is. he is the epitome of the Hyper-V industry inside of our world, and amazing, amazing, amazing man, amazing mind.
Yeah. So one of the things that I kind of took from Ben was that there's really hard to understand the intent of the information sent in an email. Adding emojis like a smile or a wink to a text or a chat might say, hey, did you remember to put in your timesheet? Might sound a lot more scary than it actually is if you just put like a pat on the back. After that, just like a gentle reminder instead of like, oh, you forgot something. So, what do you think about these modern communication doing emojis?
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about that they want less emojis, but emojis is really important, because if you have a voice conversation, you will understand if I'm ironic when I'm saying something, or if I'm mad because you haven't delivered your timesheet. Or just, Alexander, have you remembered the timesheets? And emoji can actually help you express yourself with feelings to make sure that the receiver will not be misunderstand the information and be sad and start to cry. We don't want them to cry, right?
Yeah, and just
So-
getting a typical SMS text from your boss, say we need to talk, rather than having a Teams text with an emoji and a picture in it saying that here's opportunities, we need to talk.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's the enunciation thing, right? So I used to train high school students on leadership skills and public speaking years ago, and we used to have a little game that it's the "How about me" game, right? And you could say, "Well, how about me?" Or you could say, "Well, how about me?"
Yeah.
Right? Or "How about me?" And saying those three words in three different ways can mean three very, very different things. I had a guy a number of years ago that I used to work with that always sent his emails in caps. Right? Now we all know that that's not a good thing, but back in, 99, 2000, especially, the baby boomers didn't understand that that was shouting, right? And people were coming up to him and physically shouting at him just as a joke, right? "Hey, Bob, how you doing?" Right? And after this, it went on for a few days. He was like, "Emil, what's going on?" Right? I'm like, "Well, dude, you're shouting every time you send an email." He's like, "No, it's just easier to read for me." Right? So I personally, there has to be a separation there in communication, right? If you're if you're talking amongst your colleagues, I fully support emojis. I'm actually pretty bad for emojis. I like to stick out my tongue a lot, right? Alt 0222 on the keypad. Because it's, again, you can't enunciate. The reader doesn't know if you're joking, if you're being serious, or if you're trying to throw the guy under the bus. And people have gotten fired over this. Last year, and it's a funny story, so I'm going to bring it up now. There was a company, or not a company, a person in, I think it was in the UK, and they were going to rent a house. They went to look at the house, and they talked with the person, and anyway, okay, I'll contact you later, right? She went off, and she said, "I love the place, smiley, 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 dollar sign, dollar sign, dollar sign." He took the dollar signs as a commitment to sign the lease. So he pulled the listing off of his ad, and she backed out. He sued her for lost income for 2 months' rent because he had, based upon her response, he had took that as a commitment to purchase the property. And it, right down to the courts, it came down to the emojis that she used in her text message as to whether this was a commitment or not.
oh, so point taken here is that emojis are highly favorable within organizations, but
Yeah, it's a typical thing you will do in a Teams chat channel, right? It's not something you will do in an official document
No.
to anybody else, but in an official chat window, it's
well,
okay.
how
Yeah.
about Teams now? You invite guest people into your organization with guest access into Teams. Well, what would they think when they come into your kind of zoo of people using emojis internally but never externally?
Well, from my experience right now is when I've been added into Teams as an external, I have chat capability and that's it.
Oh, so rather limited
It's
functionality.
extremely limited,
Oh,
and honestly, I haven't spent enough time with the product to know if that's an application limitation right now, or if that was an implementation constraint.
oh, that's
It's an implementation, yeah.
yeah,
Is
that's
it?
definitely a limitation. So based on my experience, when companies invite me into their teams, there's one out of two. There's either they give me an on-prem account to their Azure AD, so I'm kind of representing the company on the time and hours I'm there, or either they give me a invite as a guest user from my corporate account, and both of them gives me the same or the, the same amount of features that I would have either way. So yeah.
But there have been some problem with that the structure setup will actually give you too much access because it haven't been possible to just say that you will get into this part of this channel, but you get the entire channel. So that's the
Oh,
reason
okay.
very often you're not invited because it could be channels
So
with more.
rather than give me too much, they're going to give me nothing.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
that's true.
So,
So there are limitations to the chat and groups chatting feature, but we're definitely going to see some of those things come around.
yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things that fascinate me, and we've been debating those, and I really love your story about the dollar sign, dollar sign, dollar sign. And one of the things that I spent some time on here this winter was this TED video from Lara Bordowski, and that's actually how language shaped the way that human thinks. And she presented this kind of interesting things that people from some of the Latin countries, they say that an object break, rather from the Germanic languages, they say that I broke it. And having those contexts might actually seem that some people are rude or some people are too responsible. Have you ever like read a text that says in plain what happened, but you really misunderstood the text because of you didn't get the content's intent?
Not typically, and not from a language issue. More what I found was lost in translation, right? For some reason, one of the hardest languages in the world has become the global adoption for IT, right? English is the standard now inside of technology. So you have people from all over the world that are learning English as a second language, and you guys are perfect examples, right? Native English isn't your native language. You guys, of course, have been doing this for years and are very, very well spoken. But someone who's just started learning English as a second language after learning IT, there is that huge language barrier. And I'm actually curious to see how the Teams translation tool is going to affect that. Because ultimately, if it's coming across as a translated closed caption, things will be taken out of context.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can see actually with language translation, we can see that it works well on the Nordic language, and they fit quite good into English. But if you try to do the same with Finnish, you will not understand anything anyway. So because they have a different build on the sentences, so it's harder to translate. So the translation engine actually have to learn how to rebuild a sentence to make it mean something for you. So
The native language where I come from in Labrador, or one of the native languages where I come from in Labrador, there's no differentiation of gender. So both with people and with objects. So we call a ship, a car, a her, right? There's no gender. How would something, right? And I'm sure they're not the only language that does it, right? So this is where I'm wondering is how is all of this automation, all
yeah,
this AI going to go from language to language when it's not an apples to apples conversation, right? Like je means I. I know that because it is, but it could also mean something else in another language.
yeah,
Yeah, that's true. Taking things out of context is one of the most difficult things to kind of comprehend for the human mind. And once you have more information on the context and the intent behind, you might actually try to understand the message or the intent behind it.
yeah.
Yeah.
Very often you can actually check the quality of the translation by translating it to English and translating it back again
Ah.
to see if it's totally different in the same original language. And then you will see the feeling that other people will actually have when they are reading a translation.
That's a
Yeah.
that's a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Doing a two-way translation have saved me many, many errors.
Yeah.
So does it work with that way in Norway? Does the Norwegian language, like, do you guys follow the same tenses and everything that we do in English? Past, present, future, recent, past. All of that stuff.
There are some differences within the Norwegian languages as well. Like the dialect where me and Olav come from, we don't have any, like we lack one of the genders. So when you see a baby girl, you say it as an object. When you see a boy girl, you see it as an object. You don't say like, oh, what a beautiful baby. You don't say like a beautiful baby boy or like a beautiful baby girl. So it's the same kind of gap within the language there. But that's only one part of of the country.
Yeah, most part of it, the translation is quite good. But we have had language translation center in Voss outside of Bergen since I think it was 99 and 2000. They started with a Microsoft translation center there, and they have continued to actually make sure that we have a good translation of the Norwegian language in most Microsoft products.
Cool.
Yeah. So we talked about onboarding and creating a well-defined structure and migrating data and services, etc. Do you have any experiences of those, or like taking something from on-prem to cloud and make those more utilized than they used to be?
Yeah, you can see that actually because the structure of teams, you very often can just go into the file storage area, start to migrate just the part into the newly created channel. So you can, for instance, create HR channel, and then you can find the HR related document, and then you can migrate them. Of course, after you have done some cleaning up and hygiene wash on the stuff there, but it's easier to start that by to move your file server than the old way of thinking that we are going to get rid of the entire file server by migrating everything. It's better than to start to create the groups, migrate what should be in the group, and take it a step-by-step approach to it.
Do you got any experience in moving file servers to SharePoint Online, Emil?
I mean, OneDrive, right? OneDrive has become an awesome tool. I said for years the only people that like SharePoint are SharePoint admins. But now that OneDrive and OneDrive for Business specifically has taken a lot of that hate away. It's fun, right? And the OneDrive for Business, migrating your NAS to OneDrive, right? You can run it all through PowerShell scripts, right? It works great. I've done it a few times. I've presented on it a couple of times. It's a solid platform. One of the things that I really like about how SharePoint and OneDrive for Business have come in the last couple 3 years is that constant evolution and that constant feedback, right? User voice is one of the best things that Microsoft has ever done because it allows them to get feedback from a full representation across the entire planet and not just large enterprises that they work closely with or MVPs like us.
Definitely. And have you seen like an evolution and adoption and feature implementation on file servers as rapid as OneDrive for Business, Olav?
Yeah, no, it's one of the most busiest area for time being for my sake at least. I've done a lot of speeches, a lot of trainings, and a lot of migration to get rid of the file server. I think that will be the next big thing because now your mail is moved out. What should you do to reduce the cost of your local resources? Okay, let's do the files things, because you can save storage, you will save backup, you will save antivirus check, you will have the restore functionality in OneDrive, you have the anti-malware reaction if you get encrypted file encryptions, and then you can just restore it yourself. So it's much more easier for the user and the ITs.
It's funny you mentioned that, Olive. Not the ransomware thing, but the quick recovery. When I came down here on Friday from Canada, I left my laptop, brought my laptop bag, brought my charger, everything else, left my laptop. I was charging it because I wanted to get my sessions finished on the plane. I landed down here in Orlando. I beelined right to the Microsoft store, and I grabbed this new Surface Go. And on the way back to the airport or to the hotel, I had about 15 minutes, right? Flicked on my air card, and by the time I got back to my house or to my house, see how much I spend in a hotel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when I get back to the hotel, I was fully functional, right? I had Office, the click to run install for Office, the Office suite is blazingly fast. I clicked off, I got 4 OneDrive accounts, right? Personal, 3 business ones, added them all in, and I'm fully functional again,
Yeah.
right? And within 20 minutes. And you don't need to go through an entire suite of applications installed just to become productive.
Yeah.
And what I ended up finding out afterwards was I'm actually running this new machine in S mode. So I can't install an MSI application on this. And I never even realized I had that limitation because I don't need an MSI anymore to do my job.
That is super interesting. And to add into Olaf's perspective on local resources, I also believe some of the companies have their own Citrix or VPN solution based on people having access to files on-prem. So getting rid of that file server might actually have cascading effects on your company as well. So let's see here what we can do for your structure as goes. For the people who aren't watching this podcast but listening, one of the things that are really fascinating about Microsoft Teams is that it's based on SharePoint Online Exchange and its own structure based on everything else that's in Microsoft or Office 365, and it utilizes Azure AD's rule set or Azure AD directory settings template. And what I've done in this demo environment is that I've had some custom blocked word list, and I've blocked out the word demo, test, and trial. So one of the things that I find interesting when I come to customers is that I find a folder file deployment or a production tool that's called test or demo, and this have been running for like years. So what we effectively does is that we disable users to create a team site or an Office 365 site, including those words. So all of a sudden you have like washed away a lot of those things that might be profound language, but also you could kind of sort out and enforce that structure that you really want by disabling some of those features that you or words that you really don't want to see, like test 1, test 2, test 3. And also there's a prefix naming requirement. So I've hard-coded in Ignite minus the location of the user creating that team site. So whoever is creating that team site, that person's office is going to be in the name of that team site. And then there's an optional group name on it as well. So to give you a grasp on what that does, to create a team, you open Teams and you click create or join or create a team, and then create a team. And the visual kind of shows you in the middle of the screen there, it says Ignite minus Bergen, because that's the office of my demo user. And if I want to type in test, you can see here the name can contain test. And if you want to say test podcast, you can see that it should give you the same error message. Because as long as it contains those words, it is an ultimate denial, and that is not only a benefit when it comes to like you don't want to have all these kind of tests. It needs to be a use case and a limited use case instead of just test. Like this would be Ignite Bergen and then live podcast instead of test podcast. Because what podcast? And secondly, you will have a consistency, so you can hide profound language inside your like. Hey, I want this mean word to be hidden within everything because it's not a solo word.
It's also helpful that you actually get the location part, the office part, because then you actually get a better structure when you as an admin go into SharePoint and take a look at the sites, because all sites are just straight beneath, so it will be a hard mix. But if you know that we are going to look at something created in the Bergen office, then you can just sort by the Bergen office and you will see everything created by users in the Bergen office. So it's easier to figure out where the location of the different sites are.
But my question here is, how hard coded is this? So if you block out test, and I'm at a pharmaceutical company, and we're putting in a group for testosterone
Yeah.
medications, would that be blocked?
As long as the word contains test,
Yeah.
so let's give it a here. Testosterone. You can see that is allowed because it has to be a word of its own.
Perfect.
Yeah. So there's again, this joke is going to be lost in translation, but the word sofa in Norwegian might actually be a profound language if you just add a couple of letters to it. So you can't like remove the word sofa because you don't want profound language in it, right?
No, I'm
So,
curious.
so it is kind of intelligent there. And if you by any means need to create a test, you can do that by doing it as a tenant admin or SharePoint admin.
Right.
So admin has access. So that's the reason why I've logged in as a non-admin to show you that this is a limitation. If I were to log in as admin, you would not get that limitation.
I love it.
Yeah, and this is like, you can use office, you can use location, you can use site, you can use whatever like parameter in Azure AD as a variable. So for some companies, you can hard code in your company initial as a beginning in case you want to merge, or in case you want to split up, like you're an admin in 3 different customers and you want to structure. You see, this is that customer, this is that customer, and they might even have offices in the same city. So it begins with a customer, it ends or like follows up with the city, and then the reason of its existence. So this is a way of saying HR in Bergen.
Okay.
So that is one of the structural things that really could help it ease out how to start off with Teams, and not only Teams, but SharePoint Online as well. So let's go back to some of these things. And we've talked about structure, we talked about adoption, and we talked about lost in translations. You've done OneDrive migration, right, Emil? What kind of tools do you prefer there?
PowerShell.
PowerShell. So just for curiosity, why?
Because it's versatile and it works. If it's not going to work, I know why. It may take me a little bit to read through it, but it's versatile. And the beauty about PowerShell is, right, I'm not a Teams guy. I'm not a SharePoint guy, right? But I am a Hyper-V guy. I am a Windows guy, right? I am a data center guy. I've had to learn PowerShell as part of what my job actually is. For me to walk in now and do a Teams migration, because there is PowerShell compatibility on the back end, I don't need to learn how to navigate the UI. At the end of the day, I'm lift and shifting data.
Yep.
Right? I'm not required to do all the classifications and all the compartmentalizations. That comes after. My job is to get it from one spot, get it over to the other, so that we can properly categorize it. So yeah, PowerShell, it works.
Emil says PowerShell. What about you, Olav?
In big migrations, it's nice with PowerShell, and you can repeat the script for next case, next customer, next share that you want to do it. So PowerShell is a good tool, but for many smaller customer, that's not that well known in the PowerShell world. I actually love the SharePoint migration tool because it's so easy to set up. So even though you are not a high-level technical guy that know everything about PowerShell, you can actually just start an easy wizard. This is my site on-prem, and this is where it should be in the cloud.
I would
So
like
it's
to
easy.
see that. I've never seen that. Can
We
you
will
do
show
a
you.
demo, Alex?
Oh, spot on, Emil. I actually have a demo prepared for you just on that. So what I've done is I've created HR, or supposed to create HR here. And what you see here, we open up Teams, we click Join or Create a Team, and we create a team. And this is before I added those rule sets, so we won't follow the name standard. So here you see one of the benefits with that name policy in Power. And we create the HR department for the company because HR is rather easy to do the lift and shift for, right? We add some of the HR staff, and we click Close. and firing up SharePoint migration tool after adding some channels for like the different cities like Oslo, Bergen, Toronto,
Okay,
or
yeah, high
wherever that
level.
high level offices. You open up SharePoint migration tool, you type in the admin credential, and you follow the wizard. Um, it might take some time because it does all the checking. It checks in on your access to SharePoint Online. It does all those kind of things that you actually have those rights. And then you select the files or folders that you want to migrate to SharePoint Online. And
And
clicking on HR,
it can also be a SharePoint site if you already have a site and you will want to move it to the cloud, so you can use it for file servers and other on-premise SharePoints.
yeah, that is true. So you can find here, you can open in Teams, you see the files path, and by that you find the SharePoint Online site. It validates the SharePoint Online site and gives you the option to find the document library to add those files to. You click Add, and you simply start to migrate. And what is one of the pitfalls? One of the pitfalls with SharePoint migration tool is that it actually scraps data to C drive, to a temporary folder under user profile data or user data. So the kind of scary part is that most servers have only a limited amount of data or space on C drive, and there's these huge drives of terabytes and terabytes of data on different drives. And what you see there is that it starts to copy data from those drives to C drive to encrypt those data before transit that. So you might want to go into SharePoint migration tool and just tick off to find a different scrap site.
Oh, nice. So you can change the drive.
You can
Okay,
change the
great.
drive. Yeah.
Because that's actually really good. Because especially now, a lot of organizations will have these crazy flash NVMe drives that are driving hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of I/O per second. So we want to leverage those whenever possible and take away from the C drive.
Yeah.
You can also actually remove the old permissions while you migrate. You will take version history if you want, but you can also remove all the old access rights for users because they will get new rights on the
Right.
sites. So it's very often a good idea to just make sure that everything you move up are clean when it comes to access. So it's not an old right permission I can misuse.
So now, after we get all this documentation up and it's accessible through Teams, do we still have the full complement of conditional access policies that we can configure like we can inside of SharePoint?
Yeah, you can set up conditional access. So my recommendation is actually prepare the site before you move the data, so you can set up if there are any regulation that should be on the HR side, so it shouldn't be contain certain type of information. If you have set up the rule before you start the migration, it will actually be easier to migrate everything and don't do a security mess from the start.
Awesome,
Yeah.
thanks, Owen.
And there's two more takes on SharePoint migration tool. One of them, they encrypt your data on-prem before shipping it to SharePoint Online. And the second part is that if people start editing documents on that HR folder and update those files while SharePoint migration tool are lift and shift, it comes back and checks, hey, have you been edited since I transferred you online? Yes, you have. And it does another run.
Nice.
So, give or take, what's your take on Teams after this session, Emil?
I'm looking forward to using it more and more. I'm going to have to go back to a couple of people that I've been working with and say, take a look at how you're including your external users because, again, I thought this was a limitation of the product. So, you guys opened my eyes there. Internally, I think it's great. It's the new collaboration changes, right? I did Exchange for 20 years, and I hated every minute of it. This is phenomenal because we address the core problem, right? We're protecting the integrity of the information that drives our business. At the end of the day, this computer does not make me a dollar. Right? It's what I do with it. It's the information that's inside there that's important to me and that drives revenue for my organization. That's what I want to protect. That's what I want to control, and that's what I want to keep secure, and Teams will help me get there.
Well said.
Well said. Yeah, that's pretty much summarized everything, and it's well spoken. I think it's pretty accurate. It's pretty much spot on why we should migrate and move to Teams.
Yeah.
So
And it's still a young product, so it will get even better. Yeah. So
Well, yeah,
it's good now, but it will get even better.
the
Yeah.
announcements this week, right? Like
Yeah.
like at the keynote where you have somebody walk in the door and team says, "Hi, Lauren. Hi, Jennifer. Hi, Emil." Right? With through facial recognition, that blew my mind.
yeah,
Right? And it's cool to see how Microsoft is not just focusing on the security and the data protection of it, but they're also spending a lot of time working on that user experience and driving adoption towards it. So
Yeah.
I'm excited.
great.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
thanks.
That's